Good afternoon, everyone. I guess I'd like to first begin with a story to bring it all into context. And the story is about a man named Iqbal Kadir who was touring rural Bangladesh in around 1995. And what he realized was that there was not much communication services for the rural villagers. Now, this was a problem because the rural villagers were selling their produce in the market, but they had no way of knowing what prices the markets were offering for their produce. And because of that, middlemen were buying their produce from the farmers at very low prices and instead selling it back to the markets at very high margins. Now, this was a problem because this was leading to an endless cycle of poverty. But Iqbal Kadir wanted to change that. He came up with a revolutionary idea to put mobile phones in the hands of every village individual with the objective that if they had a better communication infrastructure, they would be able to sell their products at higher prices, and it would also lead to a growth of a mobile venture economy. And lo and behold, Grameen Telecom was born. Now, all of you may think Grameen Telecom is a very small company. No, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, Grameen Telecom is the largest telco operating in Bangladesh right now. And this is the lesson of social profits that I would like us to discuss today. Because social profits is about converting a problem in society into an enterprising business model and essentially creating both societal benefit and profits at the same time. And with this, I'm joined with an esteemed panel that includes the like of Sangu Delle, who is from Golden Palm Investments, Ghana. I'm also joined by Osama Manzar, who is the founder and director of Digital Empowerment Foundation in India. We also have Dr. Shariha Khalid, who is the co-founder of Impact Hub Malaysia and Scope Group. And we also are joined, last but not least, with Mohammed Fazeel, who is the founder of BenCure. In today's discussion, we're going to be focusing on three aspects. Number one, social profits and why it is a future market that we all need to focus on. Number two, who are the role players that will be accelerating the growth of these markets? And yes, I'm referring to both corporates and public sector role players. And lastly, what is the role of the youth in accelerating the growth of this market? I would like to begin my questions to Dr. Shariha. And Doctor, I would like to know, are social profits disrupting the way we do business today? And what role does the youth have in this market?
Thank you very much, Yusuf. First and foremost, I'd love to sort of get to know who's in the audience with us here today. If I may, Yusuf?
Yes, please.
A show of hands, who's working in a social enterprise or has some sort of connection to creating social impact? Okay. Anyone who's aspiring to become a social entrepreneur? Who are the curious souls? The rest of you are curious souls then. We have one hand at the back. Okay. So I guess in answer directly to Yusuf's question about, whether or not social profits are disrupting the way we do business these days, I guess disruption may not be the word I'm looking for at the moment. I think it's certainly putting a different perspective to how business is seen by many. Maybe it might be better to sort of take a step further before that to just sort of talk about what is social profits. Yusuf has already mentioned it earlier in his story and giving a really fine example of how you can incorporate the creation of social impact by the way you run your business. But before that, when you're talking in the world of business, profit is always priority, right? It's about the financial bottom line. And I guess when you're talking about social profits, you're looking at what are the other two bottom lines that exist that are beginning to become equally important this day, even to a traditional business. The other two bottom lines are, what are the impact of your business, what's the impact of your business on the planet and also people. So it's not just about profit alone, it's also about the people and the planet. And the disruption, I guess, if you want to use that word disruption, is really the fact that these days when you do business, you cannot separate the other two because the people who buy from you expect as well to see what your impact is on the planet and also the communities that you're serving. In terms of the opportunity for young people, I think because of the different problems that exist in this world today, right now, and also the connectivity of young people across the globe, is actually one of the best times to become a young social entrepreneur. There is so much support out there. Specifically here in Malaysia, there's also a lot of support that has come up in the last 1 year from the government. But generally out there, there's so much support and interest in enterprises that are driven by young people who are taking an effort to actually create social impact where they are. So it's one of the best times for all those of you out there who are aspiring young social entrepreneurs. Do look into this, do consider what you can do. And even you don't have to think global straight away, just think local. What can I do within my own communities?
Thank you, Doctor. I would like to direct the next question to Osama. And I understand that you work in the Digital Empowerment Foundation. May you share with us some examples of how you have empowered businesses through the digital means that your company serves to?
Thank you. I don't know whether fortunately or unfortunately, I come from a country where, every district is a country, 1.1 or 1.2 billion people, more than 25-30% people under poverty line, and the poverty line is not like Malaysia, where you have $200 poverty line below. We have about people not even earning $50 a month. I would like to, share experience of the new era of doing business and why there is so much of potential in rural areas or remote areas or underserved areas, is because suddenly the world is realizing that illiteracy, no education, are not the barriers. The barriers, because they have knowledge, they have hands to make products, they have been, making great products like handicrafts or weaving or any of those kind of things, and there is a value in it because it is not machine-based, it's people-based. So what we have been going through in the last 50 years of development is, driven by profiteering, driven by exploitation, driven by making products for the masses. I think now we are going to get into the era where the product should be made by the masses and not for the masses, where the maximum number of people should get involved. And I'll give you one example. There is a place called Chanderi in the middle of the country in India, Chanderi. When we started work there about 5 years back, they had a monthly take home was less than $50. And not even today's rate, 5 years back rate, which, $50. And the whole turnover of the entire cluster, which has got 3,500 weavers of silk saris and silk stole, they were making just under $50 a month, and the total turnover was about $10 million. Now, after 5 years, the entire cluster's turnover is $30 million, about 150 crores in Indian currency. How it happened? We broke the entire design from paper-based designing to the digital-based designing. We trained the weavers themselves to design on from the piece of paper to go on to the design on computers. They learned the entire supply chain of taking photographs in the studio, using themselves, their own woman as a model, and then creating an e-commerce and reaching out to the global market. And now from the website, we earn about $3,000 a month or $4,000 a month sitting there in that village. And the prosperity has gone from $50 a month to suddenly $250 a month for the family. And the whole issue was of information asymmetry. They didn't have a knowledge about the market. They didn't know where to sell the product. They didn't have control over the price of the raw material. They didn't have control over the design itself. Everything was controlled by middlemen. And I won't say that the middlemen are bad, because these middlemen had information. These middlemen had knowledge, and that is what they were exploiting of. And the whole mass of the weavers were not knowing that how much product that they are selling for, and how much is the price that they are further being sold to the market. So everybody was cheated. The consumer was cheated, the producer was cheated, the entire marketplace was cheated. And now, because of the transparency in the information flow, suddenly the entire thing has changed, where everybody is benefited. People are getting the right price. They know how much is the original price and how much is my buying price. People are getting, those who are weavers are getting better pricing, better returns, and they have control. They are directly reaching out to the market. From the 3,500 weavers, we have more than 2,000 of those weavers have got social media pages. They are promoting there. Those who cannot afford to sell through e-commerce, they are also promoting it through social media, and they are directly getting orders. And this is just one scenario I'm saying. In India, the size of the rural market, and only in the weaving sector, which is based on traditional skills as handloom and hand weaving, is more than about $500 million. And that is totally exploited. That entire economy is waiting to be exploited. So I think the future is going to be more from the micro enterprise perspective, micro enterprises, and the product that can be produced by the masses and not for only the masses.
Thank you, Osama. Maybe next time I'll share your example instead. It's very inspiring. Okay, I'd like to pose the next question to Sangu. How popular is investing in business with social profits right now from where you're from? And what are your criteria in selecting your investments?
Thank you for the question. Before I start, first, I want to pay some respects to my High Commissioner, His Excellency High Commissioner from Ghana, who's here. Very grateful for his presence here, Your Excellency. Thank you for visiting. So for me, it actually my involvement in impact investing comes from an interesting story where I was involved in a water and sanitation project in a village called Ejemante in Ghana. And I had a community meeting with the entire community, and I said, look, let's assume I have a World Bank budget and I could write a check for any amount. What single thing could I do for your community that you think would have the most impact? And I expected people to say, give me a sack of money or build a school or a hospital or something of the sort. And the response stunned me. They said, Yepejuma, we want jobs. So at that moment, I suddenly had this philosophical evolution in how best to aid my continent, and realizing that job creation is a more sustainable means of having an impact. And I think this is a trend you are seeing across the board, where in the past, you saw a lot of efforts focused at having an impact in Africa, looking at, how do we focus on charity? How do we focus on handouts? But now there's a greater emphasis on how do we look at business and how do we look at social enterprise as ways in which we can solve problems, we can create jobs, and we can end up with more sustainable solutions to the issues we have. So for us, we look for businesses that solve a local problem. We look for businesses that have scalable models, that have high barriers to entry, and will be able to be, on their own, will be a viable business, but combine that element of also having a social impact. So I'll give a clear-cut example. There was a situation in Kolebu, the largest teaching hospital in Ghana, where a doctor prescribed medication for a woman who had a heart condition. And they couldn't find the medication. Eventually, by the time they found the medication, 4 hours later, she passed away. So this highlighted a big issue with location and availability of drugs. So a business called M-Pharma, a social enterprise, was started to digitize the entire ecosystem and to collect data on where are drugs, who's using them, where are the pharmacies that have them, and to create an e-prescription software for doctors to be able to use that integrates the clinical data with the inventory data. So this reduces costs, this reduces mistakes, this allows you to have information on location and availability. It allows you to do work on compliance of drugs, pharmacovigilance to make sure people are taking the right drugs. And it actually creates valuable data that Big Pharma is interested in. So we've, apart from the real social impact in saving lives, we're also creating a product that Big Pharma is interested in. And we actually have signed deals with Pfizer, Novartis, and Roche, and are expanding such conversations with Bayer and a number of other pharmaceutical companies. So I think there's a clear-cut example of a business that solves a real problem and has social impact, but still creates a product that on its own is very viable and lucrative.
Thank you for that. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, Fazeel, you're probably the you're the youngest here, yeah, and you have your own social enterprise. Would you like to share with us how was it being a youth startup, and what challenges do you see the youth facing in creating their own business right now?
Okay, short answer, it's awesome. First of all, Assalamu alaikum. So what's it like being in a youth startup, right? So it's actually pretty interesting, and quite honestly, your experience would depend on your geography, where you are. So in the United States, for example, we're based in Chicago. So my company, it's in an ecosystem that's not exactly nascent, and I see somebody from Chicago. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so our ecosystem is not exactly nascent. It's something that's kind of booming, because we had Groupon, and because of it, there were some kind of domino effects where a lot of mentors started coming out of the woodwork. They wanted to help out, and all of these incubators, they didn't just become office co-working spaces. They're actually trying to help other companies out. So in my case, when I started the company in 2012, it was really challenging because we didn't have that ecosystem. We were kind of where Malaysia was maybe a year ago. And then, alhamdulillah, it's changed quite a bit to now. How I see it evolving, that's an interesting question. So the way I see it is Silicon Valley, right? If you think about how people or startups are treated in the Valley, if you think about the first VC-backed companies, Intel, Apple, that was like 20, 30 years ago. So they've had quite a bit of time to mature their ecosystem. So that's why they're so conducive to startups. Whereas, in Asia, you don't generally have that kind of experience. And it'll just take some time, but inshallah, you will reach that point. But, comparing the experience for someone in Silicon Valley versus someone in Chicago versus someone maybe in Dubai or even Kuala Lumpur, it's very different. I'm sure Sangu can talk about it, how it's like in Ghana, and mashallah, these guys are doing fantastic stuff down there. But it really depends on where it's like. And inshallah, at some point, I expect everything move towards the Silicon Valley model, but it'll take time.
Thank you for that. I find the audience not that engaged, so I just would like to ask a few questions. With a raise of hands, or you can stand up, how many of you feel it is wrong to make profits and help people at the same time? If you're helping people, you're just helping people. If you want to make profits, just make profits. A show of hands? If you feel that making profits and helping people is wrong. Come on, guys. Don't leave me hanging. No opinions?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, they are? Okay, cool. What do you think of this idea of having a social enterprise instead of just a charity? Who here would be interested in creating a social enterprise, and who here would be interested in creating a charity? Maybe charities? Okay, we have a few. Awesome. Social enterprises? Come on. You can come to me later. I'm an investor for social. I'm just joking. Okay, so we're going to move into our panel discussion now. And the first thing we're going to tackle is why social profits. And I would like to direct this question to Sangu. Sangu, why, when you were choosing investments, you wanted to choose investments with social profits? Why not just focus on normal businesses?
So I think the reason is, in the African context, I don't think we have a choice. I think, so I'll give you a clear-cut example. Take healthcare, where we're very much focused on. We currently have 1.1 billion people across sub-Saharan Africa. Our population, over the next 35 years, we're going to have 1 billion babies born in Africa. 1 billion. Just reflect on that for a second. That is 50 times the population of Malaysia in the next 35 years. So by 2050, it's estimated that there will be 2.4 billion people across all of Africa. So in the healthcare space, currently today as we speak in 2015, we have 11% of global population, yet we have 26% of global disease burden. And that 26%, if you break that down, we're responsible for 50% of global malaria cases. We're responsible for 50% of infant mortality under age 5. And yet, 11% of global population, 26% of global disease burden, and only 3% of healthcare workers. This is not sustainable, especially when you forecast the demographics of our population explosion that gets us to 2.4 billion. So I think we're faced with a compelling situation where business cannot afford to turn a blind eye to the needs of society. It's one of those things where, and healthcare, I think, is a pressing illustration. It's easy, healthcare is also one of those sectors that's sensitive. People think of it and say, well, how can you have a for-profit model in healthcare, right? Aren't you exploiting the poor? Is it fair to do this? But when you think of the challenge we have with 11% global population, 26% global disease burden, and 3% healthcare workers, I don't think we can afford to be dogmatic about approach. I think we have to be pragmatic and think of what's going to work, what's going to fix it, what's going to create results.
Awesome. Fazeel, now I understand from Sangu that social enterprises or social profits was a necessity. But in your case, in America, no one would assume a developed country requires a social enterprise. Why did you go out and create a social enterprise and not just a profitable, not just a for-profit initiative?
Okay, first of all, America has a lot of problems. Let's just get that right.
I thought Osama was getting the hard question.
Apparently not, so I'm getting picked on. That's not cool.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. I'm used to it. I guess the reason we selected to move on a social profit aspect, right? It's not, we weren't as eloquent as Sangu is with turning a blind eye and things of that nature. For us, it was what is the number one reason people die? It's heart disease. So we're like, okay, how do we solve that? We didn't necessarily set out by saying we wanted to focus on social profit. It's just that that's something that happened out of happenstance. Having said that, there are a lot of advantages for an entrepreneur to focus on an entity that's end goal is social profits. Because when I hire people, right, we get incredibly smart people, from Stanford, Harvard, Yale, whatever. They come to apply to jobs with us. We can't even compare to the compensation that large companies can give them. But the reason they come to us is because we're doing something that's meaningful. So these are people that are very smart. They've been ex-bankers. They've been earning 6-7 figures. I don't even pay a fraction of that. But the reason they come is solely because, hey, you know what? He's going to make an impact. He's going to make the world better. Like Sangu was mentioning, there's a humongous burden that's going on over there. In America, we have huge issues. There are issues with minority disparities. So we don't talk about this in public, but we on the side, we actually help departments of public health, either on the state level or on the city level, where you have African Americans or Latinos who have literally, they're in places like food deserts. They don't have access to even basic vegetables and fruits. And this is America. So I think assuming that just because it's a developed country, that they don't have issues is a little incorrect. It's just a matter of alignment, really. And if you're smart, you'll get smart people to join you.
So I guess the conclusion is that everywhere there are problems, and there's always an incentive to create a social enterprise no matter where you are.
Exactly.
I'm going to move on into now the enabler section of this discussion, and I hope my questions get difficult as we progress. And the next question is to Dr. Shariha. How can corporates engage with startups to facilitate the process of creating social enterprises?
That's not a very difficult question.
Oh,
is
come
it?
on.
I guess perhaps if we sort of go back a few steps to the reasons why businesses would be incentivized to even work with startups to create social impact. Not all businesses think in that way, Yusuf. some businesses have understood from, the kind of feedback and looking at their competitors as well, that it's important to engage with the public, your customers in a different way to show that you're also creating impact in society on other people and the planet. And some businesses, they don't even see it from that angle. They just see that it just makes business sense. That's why we're doing it. So I guess if your question is really about how can businesses engage with startups, maybe my question back to you is, do they need to engage in startups to create social impact, or could they actually look at innovating within their core businesses already of how they engage with society? I know that there's a rage at the moment of corporates wanting to engage with startups, young entrepreneurs, because, it's sexy. It's sexy to learn from young people who are in startups, because startups are sexy, you're very agile, you're very innovative, you dare to go out and test your ideas in the market. And when you're coming from a corporate angle, that sort of same agility and innovation, creativity, the courage to fail, that's what startups do best, right? That courage doesn't always come. So I guess for these corporates who are inclined to work with startups, it's because they want to learn something from these startups, but also possibly because there's a more risk or less risky model for them to test new innovations that could even make sense for their own core businesses. I guess we're trying a model ourselves at the moment with this challenge that we're running in this region in Southeast Asia. It's called the ASEAN Impact Challenge, and it's run concurrently in 10 ASEAN countries. And the idea there is, could we just put out a challenge to the people who live and work in Southeast Asia to come up with a model to create sustainable communities and resilient nations, to find these innovations. And then we married them with some corporate innovation sponsors or adopters who will mentor these ideas, these innovators, and possibly, hopefully, adopt the innovations. So we're testing this model now, and it's not based on a startup necessarily, it's more based on the innovation and the impact, and trying to see whether or not corporates would take up an innovation that has been tested by a group of innovators and has been validated in the market, but then take it up as possibly a product or a service that they will then incorporate into their core business. So I don't know the results yet, Yusuf. We're still trialing that. We'll know by November when these 100 innovators come to Malaysia to pitch during the ASEAN Entrepreneurship Summit.
Thank you for that. So, Osama, it seems like we're coming into a debate whether corporates should innovate sustainably themselves or whether they should give the job to a startup. I would like maybe if you could take a stand here and defend or say whether it should be a corporate or whether it should be a startup that innovates sustainably.
Corporates cannot innovate, as simple as that. If they innovate, they will be dead. Yeah, because they don't have wherewithal to innovate, because they have to sustain on a month-to-month basis. They have to look at their balance sheet. They have to look at their scale. They cannot. Having said that, corporate have a responsibility, what you call as corporate social responsibility, which is prevalent all over the world. In India, 2% of your net profit you have to give. It's mandatory. It's enactment of the parliament that you have to give 2% of your net profit. That is like a huge, huge amount. And now they are giving it into philanthropy, they are giving into charity, but they are also more and more giving into social investments and social enterprising investment. And that is creating a lot of market space. I mean, for example, our organization itself has got about 5 million USD as as corporate investment, corporate social responsibility investment. So actually, it's a social investment because there is no return that I have to give it to them. But it's an amount that has been given to us to replicate what we did in Chanderi, like I told you. So we have a chance to create about 5 more social enterprises in 5 more cluster of businesses to make it sustainable. And they're very happy about it, that we are, whatever money that we are giving, it's not only our logo is going to be visible, but it will always be there to be named as that, the money has come from this organization and it has created an impact which is long lasting. So it is not time-bound charity like, healthcare center or that is done, or a health camp is done, or the water has been given or something. It's a sustainable thing. And I'm not saying only about e-commerce or IT enabled, in many, many sectors. I mean, many people are giving investment in the area of creating drinking water ATM, where in the rural areas, you push a button, you get a drinking water and take home on a rupee, 100, liters or something like that. It's a huge amount. So there is a lot of, I would say, corporates are not going to solve the problem of social enterprising, or for that matter, startup innovation, but there is a marriage. There is a realization that the youth is more capable of innovation, and there is a hunger of innovation. And there are more and more people who are trying to create an enterprise which has to be socially conscious. That means environment around you, the people around you, the women around you, and all those responsibilities. So you are basically creating an enterprise with lots of responsibility, that you are not only going to make profits, but you are going to do something which is not profiteering, which is not exploitative, which is not in terms of taking all the money to yourself, but also larger distribution. So there is a lot of consciousness that is coming up, and that is the reason I said initially, the scenario of digital inclusion, the scenario of digital pervasiveness is creating a very, very conscious masses, who were conscious, but now they're connected. And therefore, the economy is also gradually going to transfer from individual-based or business-based or a government-based running the business or a control-based running a business to more participative business, where, where the crowd is itself going to create business. And so my assumption is that the more and more you're getting into the future markets are going to be more oriented towards finding a problem and giving a solution, not necessarily doing a business.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree.
Perfect.
I think I disagree on a number of levels. I think it is, look, I don't think innovation or startups is something that is intrinsically endemic to young people or to the youth. And I think you have a laundry list of examples. Take Apple. Apple is an incredible example of innovation, right? They came out with the Mac. They were about to die. They brought in Steve Jobs back, and then they came out with the iPhone. It literally reinvented itself. You take Google, which is now Alphabet. I think Google/Alphabet is constantly reinventing itself and constantly showing that they've built a culture around the DNA of innovation. You take, even in the investing world, you take Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's investment company. It used to be a textile company. When he acquired it, it was a textile company. He then innovated and changed it into mostly an insurance company that used insurance premiums to make equity investments. And it's now one of the largest private investors in the PE space. And in the African context, I'll take Safaricom, which is the largest telecommunications company in East Africa, which pioneered the leading mobile payment solution in the world, M-Pesa. So I don't think innovation or the startup scene is necessarily just limited to youth or to startups. And I don't think it's even limited just to even corporations. I would argue that some governments have been examples of innovation. If I take the government of Rwanda, Kagame's government has been an extraordinary example of entrepreneurship, of public entrepreneurship, where he's changed the language from French to English, and without question has had one of the most effective governments in terms of achieving results on development indicators.
Primarily, this discussion is on startups. Maybe, Sangu, if you could add here, how would you package yourself as a company in order to approach a corporate so that they would be interested in you? I understand a lot of startups approach companies, but most of the time they get rejected because they are not interesting enough to the corporate. What would you advise these startups to do differently so that they are more attractive?
I will first and foremost challenge even the notion that you necessarily need to go to corporates for partnership or for funding. I think you have to be innovative about how you even get funded and how you hit the marketplace. Look, I think the advantage we have today in 2015 as opposed to 15 years ago is the internet. Right? Today we have the ability to crowdfund, and crowdfunding has been growing at a pace that's been quite extraordinary. So from Kickstarter to Indiegogo, you have a chance where previously you could only get funding from a small elite group in the valley, or the gatekeepers of capital, or those in corporates. But I think now you have a democratization of that capital where you can, if your idea is good enough and you can get it viral enough, you can get, by people pitching in $5, $10, $20 here and there, you can amass capital on a global basis to be able to power whatever your startup is.
Actually, may I interject on that?
Yeah, Ashi would like, Fazeel, if you could add your startup journey, if you have engaged with any corporates, and what was your
Sure.
experience?
So Sangu hit an interesting point. So the issue that I have with that answer is it's mostly focused on B2C companies, right? So if you're a B2B company like mine is, where we deal with healthcare, we deal with people who have health disparities, they need help, but the average Joe in America, or average person here, he's not willing to pay $300-400 for a service, even if it makes him live another few years, right? So in those kind of scenarios, I can't go crowdfund. It's not going to work. Nobody's going to give me $5. Forget a cent. I need to go with the corporate partners, and in those cases, I need to look for companies. Some of the companies that he talked about with one of his portfolio companies, we're actually working with some of them ourselves. Where you have an innovation officer. His sole job is to find companies like you that are innovating. It's got nothing to do with my age or the fact that I'm a startup. It's just because I'm working on something that's interesting, which they may not have looked at. And the reason I have the agility to do that is because I am a small entity. So being a startup kind of sort of works with it. As a large corporation, whether you're talking about big pharma or health systems or whatever the industry, they have a lot of processes in place to prevent themselves from making stupid mistakes. In our case, it's 4 guys. I go in, I say I want to make X. Everybody on it? Great, let's build it. Then we go talk to the corporate people. If they're interested in it, great, we have our first customer, and that's how we make our revenue. That could be a way you go to investors, because if I go to an investor now and I say I'm going to go for crowdfunding when I'm a B2B business, they'll laugh me out the door. And I'm sure that's happened to you too, where you have people come in prematurely. So it really depends on what kind of business you have, quite honestly. And if it is a B2B business, definitely seek out the corporations. Just look for the companies that are not just paying lip service to innovation, but are actually looking to broaden their revenue streams. That could be an in for you as a company.
I think I would like to go away from the corporate angle now and maybe address the public-private partnership angle. And Doctor, I would like you to answer that question. How can governments work more closely to enable the growth of social profits or social enterprises?
I think governments actually play a really crucial role in creating being facilitators and creating an environment that fosters collaborations between change makers, social entrepreneurs, as well as corporations. And they can provide this facilitation in many different ways. One could be as an investor. So a government could become a co-investor in projects or ventures that create specific social outcomes. They could also play a role in creating environments that will enable investments to come in. So, for example, tax incentives or creating, issuing specific financial instruments that can draw in investments from different parties. So multiple roles, but I think what's important is that it's important to note that there's only certain things that government can do, and actually for a lot of the things that are needed to really create an impact in this world today, we need to move away from a dependence on government alone to deliver social outcomes. On the same note, I'd like to also say that we should not rely on social entrepreneurs alone to deliver those same outcomes. It really has to be a collaboration, a partnership between multiple sectors to really enable social outcomes to be realized. And to be quite honest, it doesn't mean that you have to form a social enterprise before you can create social impact in society. There are many other pathways for doing so. Of course, the traditional one is by creating a non-profit organization, an NGO, a charity, but then you're also then faced with the issue of, how do you get a sustainable stream of funding for your activities? So I think if we're looking to the future of what the possibilities are and what the need really is, it's about formal collaborations between parties from different sectors. So having, for example, specific funds or whatever investment platforms that actually have different parties sitting in there. Something like a social impact bond, for example. Some of you might not have heard of it, but it's basically a bond that is tagged to the achievement of certain social outcomes before you can actually cash in on the bond. So something like that, for example, the government can play a really important role in actually being the party that would want to buy the social outcomes, i.e. paying the investors if the social outcomes are achieved. The corporates or investors, traditional investors, could be the ones investing in this entity that is supposed to be delivering the social outcome. So that entity could be the social enterprise, it could be a non-profit. But basically, curating a platform like that will enable that sort of partnership and collaboration to happen. And not necessarily, something that has to rely on government starting it alone. In Malaysia, we were working last year with the Malaysian government to sort of find new models for public-private partnerships and how they can unlock capital from the private sector, but also, other sources of capital that can fund social outcomes. And what's interesting is our client then went on to kind of develop this further and actually created a new social public-private partnership as a result of some of the information that they got from this feasibility study last year. So now there are actually 2 or 3 different social PPPs that they're working on. One is using the collective impact model, and that's a sort of matching funding between a group of corporates and then the government matching whatever the corporates raised in terms of funds. And that's specific to the area of education. Another group is basically funding the adoption of technology in the delivery of social services or social results. And then separately, we are also working to see how you could create a sort of a looser collaboration between different parties, but then all aligned towards achieving social progress in the country. So I think the short answer to your question is, government can play a huge role in this, especially as a facilitator or as a purchaser of social outcomes. But what's important is to note that, it's not just on one party to make this happen.
Sure. Thank you for that. I guess we got a good insight of what governments can do. I'd like to open it up to the entire panel. What governments should not do in order to grow this sector? Is there anything governments should stay away from in order to enable the growth of this sector?
Are you asking me?
Anyone?
Yeah, I guess government should basically focus on policy, large infrastructure, and attitude, positive attitude, rather than trying to do all the things in their own hands. So government should not get into hand-holding or, getting things done. Having said that, just to your question, last question that you were posing, one of the things that our government did is 150 million job-making policy they created because they have to, in the next 10 years, they have to create 150 million people skilled. So they have created a whole commission, which is National Skill Development Commission, to create skilling and training and all that, and funded it, and that is being provided as on a either debt or investment or something, and the corporates and not-for-profit organizations are invited to make entities. So these kind of initiatives can be done. Make policies which inspire innovation, make policies which inspire entrepreneurship and investment. So I would say government should be off doing, but create a great policy and the positive policy to enable the entrepreneurship and innovation.
I would agree with that. I think the earlier two comments about creating the enabling environment, the one thing I'll say government should not do, and I hope His Excellency is listening, at his investor presentation, he mentioned this 26% tax. I think government should not tax us too much when we're starting to create this social startup ecosystem. So in giving room and allowing room, maybe a tax holiday for 5 or 10 years to allow the sector to grow legs. That's what government should do.
Thank you for that. Okay, I guess we'll end with the last question, and I'll pose this to Fazeel. Fazeel, can you maybe advise young entrepreneurs of what they should do in order to grow their business? And what do you see are the problems with current startups that you have worked with?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. So, here's the thing, right? So this is my second company. My first one I started back when I was in college, made a bunch of mistakes, and I kind of used that as an experiment. One of the big things that I learned is when you're hiring people, hire them as a culture fit. So try to build your culture first. It's something that a lot of people talk about, but not a lot of people know what they're doing. So when you're hiring people, for example, in our case, we specifically look for individuals that meet our skill set need, but also have an intrinsic reason to help out. So every single one of my engineers has a family member who's gone through a medical emergency. So in their case, they have an intrinsic reason to help out. It's not just because they're getting paid well, they're getting equity or whatever. It's because they really want to make an impact. That's one of my basic pieces of advice to a company. Assuming that you're talking about youth startups, one of the things that I see as a problem generally is, as people who are in Generation Y, people born in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we tend to have this bravado of, we can do anything because, our parents did well and so on. Because of that, we sometimes foolishly go into areas where we don't really know much about it, and we just assume that, we'll figure it out as we go along. In our case, healthcare is a very complicated field. When you're talking about cardiovascular disease or heart failure, it's even more complicated. I'm not a physician. My guys aren't physicians either. But how we complemented that, and this is something I learned really quickly, is we got advisors who were experts in that field. So think of the largest biomedical company on the planet. The guy who's in charge of their VP of R&D, he's now as an advisor with us. We have cardiologists in multiple different states. And the reason I do that is because they're working in different areas of healthcare, and they're able to provide me specific feedback from different areas. And that's how I complete my team. So if you're thinking of starting a company, inshallah, and I hope you guys become great, fantastic people that are on Forbes at some point, what I'd strongly advise you is, A, make sure you're getting people that actually meet the culture, and you have a core mission as to why you're doing something. Not just what you're building, but why are you building it in the first place. Once you figure that out, then make sure you have advisors who are experts in that field. I guess those would be my two main takeaways if you're starting a company.
Thank you very much to the panel. I would like to open the floor to Q&A. If you would like to ask the panel any question, or if you'd like to ask me any question, please, now is the opportunity. I guess while waiting for that, maybe someone raise their hand? Yeah. If I may request, can we keep our questions short, if possible? Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, you want a short question?
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon.
Yes.
My name is Ryan Hilliard from the United States, Chicago to be specific. Thank you very much for this panel. It's very, very helpful for me, especially in my field, which is an organization called Floodplains, which the social impact goes specifically towards preserving ancient manuscripts from different regions where there isn't an interest for that, and the value of those areas or those tangible resources are not given their true value because they're preferred, because making a dollar or even other interests become above those, and they end up getting destroyed or.
Sir, your question?
My apologies. So my question is specifically for the entire panel is, how do you, when you present this idea of your idea of having a social impact to a potential investor, what kind of language do you specifically use or look for in order to make sure that you identify that there is common ground between your understanding of what their responsibility is as an organization or as a corporation or as an investor and what your responsibility is to your constituency? Thank you.
Look, as an investor, I'll tell you straight up that, look, the impact is great, but what's the business model? So when I spoke about M-Pharma, by digitizing the ecosystem in the data play, created an impact in terms of it saved lives. It was a no-brainer. But the business model was it came up with data that was valuable to pharmaceutical companies. So we could sell it to Pfizer, Novartis, Roche, Bayer, GSK. There was a business model that was, that went hand in hand with the social impact. So it's great that you're preserving manuscripts. You should go to Timbuktu. There's a lot of social value there. But the question becomes, what is the business model? How are you going to monetize these assets you're collecting? And it's important because if you don't have that, the impact is irrelevant because how do you keep it sustainable? Where do you get your funding pool from? And how do you ensure that it's self-sustained on an ongoing basis? So I would focus on the business model and how you monetize those assets.
If I may add to that as well, ultimately, if you're going down the route of becoming a business person and starting an enterprise, it really is about the business model. Because if you're saying, oh, I'm creating this business, but my sole driver is I want to create social impact, ultimately, if your business doesn't survive, then you can forget about creating the impact as well. So first and foremost, really get the business model to be really, good, tested, and then build into it the impact model. How are you going to be delivering the social impact via this business model? If there isn't a business model that you feel is strong enough, then go down the sort of non-profit charity route. That's also okay, because there may be some grants available for the very niche type of work that you do. Even though we run a social enterprise and we run an incubator, we run an accelerator for social enterprises, we're still very much into supporting non-profits. In fact, we ran last year together with a bank in Malaysia, the first NGO accelerator, because it was really about accelerating NGOs, because we believe that NGOs can actually create bigger, deeper impact and be financially sustainable given the right sort of governance frameworks and the right, exposure in the market and understanding how they're actually modeling how they're creating the impact. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, sir. Your question?
Yeah. Actually, I've got a couple. I don't know whether you would allow me that.
Maybe one at a time.
Okay. I'd like to dig a bit deeper into your mindset and how you perceive yourselves. So one question is, you mentioned tax. So what is your view about the position or the place of taxation for the delivery of social impact services? Is it the kind of American thing where we need low tax, or the Scandinavian model where it's very high taxation and excellent social delivery? So, how do you perceive taxation in this whole, this whole area of social impact delivery?
You would like Fazeel?
Your question is, how do we think about taxes in terms of low taxes in the US example or the Scandinavian model of high taxes and social delivery? I think the tax regime is, you should be agnostic. Regardless of the tax regime, I think for social businesses, there should be a tax benefit in the sense that I don't think I should, as a social business, I don't think I should pay the same taxes as Newmont Mining, right? I think that for the positive externality social businesses have on society, there should be a tax credit that differentiates and says society gives these businesses a different outlook and categorization versus a mining company or versus some other company that isn't going to have that same type of positive externality. And I think that should hold whether it's a US tax system or a Scandinavian tax system. That would be my approach.
Maybe Fazeel,
Having lived in Scandinavia before and also in the UK, I think tax is great, but only if you as a government are able to fully realize the tax collection. I know in Scandinavia they are very vicious about collecting tax, and they're able to actually get a lot of tax back from their citizens. It's not such a case in other countries in the world. And yes, when the whole idea of tax was introduced in this century, it was really about, okay, this is how we're going to get the citizens and businesses to contribute towards the delivery of social outcomes for the country. But again, it's only good if you're able to collect that tax and then rechannel it for social causes.
Fazeel, actually, I'd like your input whether having to pay tax, did it impede the growth of your business?
Okay, so I was waiting till my colleagues finished. So for a startup, regardless whether it's social or not, the biggest thing that you need to focus on is your cash flow, right? Cash is expensive, equity is not, regardless of what other people say. So when it comes to taxation, right, especially when you're a new entity, you need some kind of tax credits. Just like he was suggesting for the folks in Ghana, having tax credits makes a huge impact. In our case, because we work in R&D and things of that nature, we do get tax credits. So we don't have to pay as much tax as other entities do, but that's because we're focused on a longer term goal, right? So taxation is kind of a double-edged sword, especially for a startup. Low taxes is definitely better, but then again, as you mentioned in the example, I'm representing the American side, so obviously low taxes, woohoo, right?
If no one else has a question, we can get your second question. Sorry, there's one question.
Sorry, for the benefit of those who were not at the presentation, I think Sangu got me in the middle of it, not all the story. We are learning from Malaysia, and I did say that Malaysia has developed its private sector to the point where the private sector is able to take on the implementation of national development plans. And the way the government is going about it is that it encourages it and makes sure that whatever problems they come up with are cleared as quickly as possible. And that is a value in having the organization which they call Pemuda, which itself, I believe in Malaysian language, it means facilitator or facilitating. And so the idea is that they need to nip the problem quickly so they go back to work and so they can pay their taxes. But in the case of the situation where you are starting a business, and particularly when it has a bend for social outcomes, certainly in Ghana, as is here, some consideration is given so that the task can be done. It's the private sector that is making money and which government is assisting to make money that the government has the interest in also collecting its stake, which is generally around 26, 27%.
Your Excellency.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. So there's no question.
No, it's not a question. I just clarify.
So anyone else has a question? So there's one question. Please.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Muhammad Shakib Alam. I'm from India. I'm doing master in political science in IIUM, International Islamic University, Malaysia. My question is actually, if you want to do anything, especially in rural area in India, what the challenge we face actually, the people's attitude and their observation or thinking of what we are doing, and the different kind of thinking what are the motives of us of doing all these things. Especially we are trying to do the one NGOs for the education for the poor people there. But so how to face this kind of thinking there? This is the one question. And related to that,
Just one question, sir.
all right.
I think, Osama, this question is meant for you.
Osama.
Yeah. I think it was fated for you.
We work in rural areas. We started about 10, 12 years back. We have 150 centers in one location. I have never faced any problem in working in rural areas. They are beautiful people, but somebody who comes from outside, they need to prove a point that they are there for the benefit of the people and not to exploit them. So that's why their apprehension must be appreciated, that how can they accept somebody coming from outside, even if claiming that they would do something good, because most of the people come and exploit them and go away. So even if you are starting a not-for-profit organization, going into work into a certain village or any place, you have to prove a point that you are there for good, you are there for doing good for a long time, and people automatically come back to you, when you are there for good. So it takes time.
I think Osama raises a good issue about having humility. And I think sometimes if you're launching a business in the US or you're launching a business with urban consumers, you're going to take the time to figure out what our consumer preference is. And you're going to do market testing. But suddenly, when we are doing a nonprofit or a charity, or we are dealing with rural people, we discard those things. And we suddenly have this idea that we can assume to think like them, or we can project what we want as what they want. And I think that's probably an arrogant perspective and one which would not work well. So we need to have humility when we're coming up with these interventions and ensure that we actually approach it and understand what people want and design interventions that are need-based.
I think you're raising, Sangu, I think you're raising a really important point there that, sometimes when you're really passionate, you want to become a change maker, you want to create impact in this world, you assume that your ideas are the best ideas to solve the problem of others. But actually, you're never going to be able to understand that other person's problem unless you are there in that same situation as they are. So if you're trying to find solutions, create banking solutions for the poor, how much can you, someone who's never been poor, really, understand what it's like for that person? So this is why one of the things that we try to encourage in the programs that we run is that the people who you might call beneficiaries, they're not beneficiaries. In fact, you may be their beneficiaries because you're getting a sort of a reward from, personally feeling like you're helping somebody. But actually that whole sort of, that's an old adage basically of this whole I'm helping you and you're the beneficiary. If you want to become a change maker, a true social entrepreneur, you've really got to come from the lens that that person is an asset to you, because that person understands that problem much more than you ever will. And because that person is an asset, you're able to create a business model that can deliver social impact. So maybe this is just something that we've got to start thinking about and practicing, especially if we're all aspiring to become change makers in this world.
All right, guys, unfortunately, time is up. Thank you very much for this session. If I just may summarize just a bit more. If I just may summarize what we discussed today. One, there's a problem everywhere. So even if we are from a developed or developing nation and we feel our nation is rich, there's still a problem that needs solving. Number two, there are a lot of key players that can help you in your business endeavors. But please bear in mind when approaching them, make sure that you fit into their profiles or their objectives. Do some research before you go to your customers. And lastly, remember to be lean and remember to be humble, because your solution may not necessarily be the best solution. With that, thank you very much.